Claire Whitfield woke up at 3 in the morning because the other side of the bed was cold. Daniel was not there. This was not new. For almost a year he had been slipping out of bed in the middle of the night, and she had stopped asking why. But tonight was different. Tonight, she heard him crying. She lay still in the dark, listening. The sound came from his study, down the hallway, muffled through the closed door. Claire had never heard her husband cry before, not once in 11 years of marriage. Daniel was the kind of man who stayed calm during storms, who fixed broken things without complaint, who never raised his voice. A man like that crying alone at 3 in the morning was something Claire could not ignore. She got out of bed and walked toward the light coming from under the study door. Her bare feet made no sound on the wooden floor. When she reached the door, she paused with her hand on the handle. Part of her wanted to knock. Part of her wanted to turn around and pretend she had heard nothing. She chose to knock. The crying stopped instantly. She heard quick movement, a drawer sliding shut, papers rustling. When Daniel opened the door, his eyes were red, but his face had already rearranged itself into something calm and unreadable. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Needed some air." Claire looked past him into the study. Everything looked normal. His desk, his laptop, the old bookshelf they had bought together at a flea market years ago. But something in the room felt disturbed, like a held breath. "You were crying," she said. "I wasn't." His voice was gentle, but firm, the way it always was when he wanted a conversation to end. "Go back to sleep, Claire. I'll be there in a minute." She did not argue. She went back to bed, but sleep did not come. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the last few months. Daniel had changed, not in obvious ways. He still kissed her goodbye every morning. He still asked about her day. He still remembered to buy her favorite tea when it ran low. But there was a distance now, a wall she could not name or touch, only feel. It had started around the time of their anniversary in October. Claire had planned a small dinner, nothing extravagant, just the two of them at the restaurant where he had proposed. Daniel had agreed to go, but that morning, she found him standing at the kitchen window, staring at nothing, holding his coffee cup so tightly his knuckles had gone white. When she asked if he was okay, he smiled and said he was just tired from work. That night at dinner, he was polite and warm, but somewhere behind his eyes, he was somewhere else entirely. Claire had noticed other things too, small things she had brushed aside one at a time, but which now, lying awake at 3 in the morning, began to form a pattern. Daniel flinched whenever she mentioned certain dates. He avoided looking at old photo albums, the ones from before they met, when he was in his early 20s. Once, she had suggested they visit his hometown for a weekend trip, and he had changed the subject so quickly, it felt like he had physically stepped back from her. And then there was the drawer. At the bottom of his study desk, there was a drawer that had always been locked. Claire had never thought much of it. Everyone has private things, she had told herself. Old letters, tax documents, whatever it was not her business. But now, after tonight, after the crying and the guilty look on his face when he opened the door, she could not stop thinking about that drawer. The next morning, Daniel left for work early, kissing her forehead the way he always did. "I love you," he said, the same words he said every day, in the same steady voice. But Claire searched his eyes for something, some crack in the calm surface, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw it, a flicker of sadness so deep it startled her. After he left, the house felt too quiet. Claire made herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing in particular, the way Daniel had stared at the window weeks before. She thought about calling her sister, Lucy, who lived across town and always had an opinion about everything. Lucy had been suspicious of Daniel's mood for months now, ever since Claire first mentioned it during one of their weekly phone calls. "Maybe he's just going through something," Lucy had said back then. "Men don't always talk about their feelings the way we do." But last week, Lucy's tone had shifted. "Claire, I don't want to scare you, but you need to pay attention. Distant husbands who cry in private and lock drawers don't usually have nothing to hide." Claire had dismissed the comment at the time. Daniel was not the kind of man who hid things. He was steady, honest, dependable. He had never given her a single reason to doubt him in 11 years. But now, sitting alone in the kitchen, replaying the sound of his crying in her mind, doubt crept in like cold water finding a crack in a wall. She decided to call Lucy. "He was crying," Claire said. the moment her sister picked up, in his study, at 3 in the morning. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Crying? Daniel? I know. It doesn't make sense. He's never cried in front of me. Not even when his father passed away. He just gets quiet and handles things. But last night, it wasn't quiet. It was real crying, Lucy. And when I opened the door, he shut everything down so fast, like I had caught him doing something wrong. Do you think he's seeing someone? Lucy asked carefully. Claire's stomach tightened at the words, even though she had already thought them herself in the dark hours of the night. I don't know. Maybe. I don't want to think that, but I don't know what else it could be. There's a drawer in his desk. It's always locked. I never cared before, but now I can't stop thinking about it. Have you asked him what's in it? No. I'm scared to. What if I ask and he lies to me? Or worse, what if I ask and he tells me the truth, and the truth is something I can't fix? Lucy was quiet for a moment. Claire, listen to me. Whatever is going on, you deserve to know. You've given this man 11 years. If something is wrong, you have every right to find out what it is. After the call ended, Claire sat with her coffee going cold in front of her, thinking about the woman she had been 11 years ago when she first met Daniel. She remembered how he had looked at her the very first time, across a crowded room at a mutual friend's party, like she was the only person there. She remembered how careful he had been with her heart from the very beginning, never rushing, never pushing, always making her feel safe. That was the man she had married. That was the man she still loved. But love, Claire realized, does not protect you from secrets. It only makes the discovery of them hurt more. That evening, Daniel came home a little later than usual. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from more than just work. He hugged her at the door, longer than usual, and for a moment, Claire almost forgot her suspicions in the warmth of his arms. Almost? Rough day? She asked, pulling back to look at his face. Something like that, he said, offering a small, tired smile. I'm sorry about last night. I didn't mean to worry you. You can talk to me, Daniel. Whatever it is. He looked at her for a long moment, and Claire thought, just for a second, that he might actually tell her something real. His mouth opened slightly, like the words were right there, ready to come out. But then he closed it again, and the wall came back up. It's nothing, he said. Just old memories. Everyone has them. Claire wanted to press further, but something in his eyes told her that tonight was not the night. She let it go, for now, but she made a quiet decision, as she watched him walk toward the kitchen, to make dinner like nothing had happened. She was going to find out what was behind that locked drawer, one way or another. Not because she wanted to invade his privacy, but because she could no longer live in the silence that had slowly grown between them. A silence that felt less like peace, and more like a wound neither of them wanted to touch. That night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Claire lay awake beside him, studying his face in the dim light from the window. He looked peaceful now, but she remembered his face from the study door, the redness around his eyes, the guilt that had flashed across his features before he could hide it. Whatever he was carrying, it was heavy, and whatever it was, it had a hold on him that 11 years of marriage, of love, of trust, had not been able to loosen. She thought about the locked drawer, sitting quietly in the study down the hall, holding whatever truth Daniel had chosen to bury. Claire did not know it yet, but that small piece of furniture held the answer to every question that had been building inside her for months. It held a story that would change everything she believed about her marriage, about her husband, and about the quiet at the center of it all. For now, she closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep would not come easily. Somewhere in the house, in that locked drawer, the truth was waiting, and soon, whether she was ready for it or not, Claire would find it. 3 days passed, and Claire found no good moment to ask Daniel about the drawer. Every time she thought about bringing it up, something stopped her. Maybe it was fear of the answer. Maybe it was hope that things would simply return to normal on their own, the way small storms sometimes pass without leaving damage behind. But the storm inside her marriage was not passing. It was only growing quieter, and quiet storms, Claire was learning, could be the most dangerous kind. On Thursday evening, Daniel told her he had to work late again, the 4th time that week. Claire nodded and said she understood, the way she always did. But this time, After he left, she stood in the hallway outside his study for a long time, just looking at the closed door. She had never been the kind of woman who searched through her husband's things. In 11 years, she had never once opened his phone without permission, never once gone through his wallet, never once questioned where he had been unless he offered to tell her. Trust had always come easily between them, built slowly over years of honesty and small kindnesses. But trust, Claire realized, was not the same as knowledge. She trusted Daniel completely, and yet she knew almost nothing about what was happening inside him right now. She pushed the study door open and stepped inside. The room smelled like him, like old books and the faint trace of his cologne. Claire walked to the desk and sat down in his chair, feeling like an intruder in her own home. Her eyes moved to the bottom drawer, the one that was always locked. She pulled at the handle gently, already knowing it would not open, but needing to try anyway. It did not open. Claire sat back and looked around the room for a key. She checked the top drawer, which was unlocked and filled with ordinary things. Pens, a stapler, old receipts, a stack of business cards. She checked the shelf above the desk, running her fingers along the spines of books that had belonged to Daniel since before she knew him. Nothing. Then her eyes landed on a small wooden box on the highest shelf, tucked behind a row of old novels. She had seen the box before, years ago, when they first moved into the house, but she had never asked what was inside it. Daniel had simply placed it on the shelf and never mentioned it again, and Claire, respecting his privacy, had never brought it up. She reached up and brought the box down carefully. It was lighter than she expected. Inside, nestled among a few old coins and a faded movie ticket, was a small brass key. Claire's heart began to beat faster as she carried the key to the desk. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the lock. This was the last moment where she could still choose not to know. Once she opened this drawer, there would be no going back to the comfortable not knowing she had lived in for months. But the not knowing had already become unbearable. She turned the key. The lock clicked open with a soft, final sound. Claire pulled the drawer open slowly, almost expecting something dramatic, though she could not have said what. Instead, what she found was quiet and small. A stack of old photographs, their edges worn soft with age. A dried flower, pressed flat and faded to the color of old paper. A few letters, tied together with a thin ribbon. And underneath everything, a woman's silver bracelet, delicate and clearly old, clearly meaningful, clearly not hers. Claire's hands trembled as she picked up the photographs first. They showed Daniel, younger, maybe in his early 20s, standing beside a young woman with dark curly hair and a warm, easy smile. In one photo, they were laughing together on a beach. In another, they stood in front of what looked like a small countryside cottage, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. In every photo, Daniel looked happy, in a way Claire had never quite seen before, not even in their own wedding pictures. It was a different kind of happiness, young and unguarded, the happiness of someone who had not yet learned what loss could do to a person. Claire turned the photographs over, searching for names or dates. On the back of one, in handwriting that was clearly not Daniel's, was written, "Us at Millbrook, summer before everything changed. Love always, E. E." Claire stared at the letter, her mind racing through every woman's name she could think of that began with that letter. She had never heard Daniel mention anyone whose name started with E, not in 11 years, not once. She set the photographs aside and reached for the letters tied with ribbon. There were 5 of them, each addressed simply to Daniel, in the same handwriting from the photograph. Claire's fingers hesitated over the ribbon. Reading someone else's letters felt like a violation, deeper than simply finding them. But she had already come this far, and the questions burning inside her would not let her stop now. She untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. It was dated almost 15 years ago, long before Claire had ever met Daniel. The handwriting was careful and neat, clearly written by someone young, someone in love. "Daniel," it began, "I keep thinking about what you said last night. About forever. About the little house we talked about building near the lake. I know we are young, and I know everyone says we have plenty of time, but I don't want to wait for someday. I want it now, with you. All my love, always, Eleanor." Claire read the letter twice, then set it down carefully, as if it might break. Eleanor. The name settled into her chest like a stone. She picked up the second letter, then the third, each one filled with the same warmth, the same unmistakable devotion, the same easy talk of a shared future that clearly never came to be. The fourth letter was different. The handwriting was shakier, less certain. Daniel, the doctors say the treatment isn't working the way we hoped. I don't want you to see me like this, but I also don't want you to stay away because you're scared. I need you here. Please, don't let this be the thing that breaks us. I love you more than I have ever loved anything. Claire's hands went cold. She understood now, with a growing dread, what she was reading. Eleanor had been sick. Eleanor had been dying. And Daniel, the man Claire had married 11 years ago, had loved this woman with the kind of intensity that young, unguarded love carries, before life teaches you to protect your heart. She reached for the final letter with trembling fingers. This one was shorter than the others, and the handwriting was barely legible, clearly written by someone with very little strength left. My dearest Daniel, if you are reading this, it means I did not get the chance to say everything I wanted to say to you in person. I need you to know that loving you was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I do not regret a single day of it, even now. I know you will grieve, and I know you will blame yourself for things that were never your fault. Please don't. Please live, Daniel. Fall in love again someday, when you are ready. Let someone love you the way I loved you. Don't let what happened to me become a wall you build around your heart forever. I will always be with you, in the quiet moments, in the mornings, in the small things. But I want you to have a whole life, a full one, with someone who gets to grow old beside you, something I was never given the chance to have. Promise me. All my love, forever, Eleanor. Claire sat completely still, the letter trembling in her hands, tears sliding silently down her face. She was not crying out of jealousy or anger. She was crying because she finally understood the weight her husband had been carrying alone for years. A weight he had never once shared with her. Not in 11 years of marriage. Not through a single conversation. Not through a single moment of vulnerability. She thought about all the times Daniel had gone quiet on certain dates. She thought about the way he flinched at the mention of his hometown, the way he avoided old photo albums, the way he had cried alone in this very room just days ago. It all made a terrible kind of sense now. Somewhere in his past, he had loved a woman named Eleanor with his whole heart, and somewhere in his past, he had lost her, and he had never told Claire a single word about it. The question that rose in Claire's mind was not why Daniel had loved someone before her. That was not the wound. Everyone had a past. The wound was the silence, the 11 years of carrying this alone, of building an entire marriage on top of a grief he had never let her see. Why hadn't he trusted her with this? Did he think she would love him less for it? Did he think she would judge the depth of his past love as some kind of threat to their present one? Claire carefully returned the letters to their ribbon, placed the photographs back beside them, and closed the drawer, locking it again with the small brass key. Her hands were still shaking as she returned the key to the wooden box and placed it back on the shelf, exactly where she had found it. She sat in Daniel's chair for a long time after that, staring at the closed drawer, feeling the shape of a decision forming inside her. She could pretend she had never opened it. She could go back to the comfortable silence they had been living in, let Daniel keep his grief locked away, let their marriage continue exactly as it had been, or she could tell him what she had found, and risk breaking open something that had been sealed shut for 15 years. Claire thought about Eleanor's final words in that last letter. Let someone love you the way I loved you. Don't let what happened to me become a wall you build around your heart forever. A wall. That was exactly what Claire had felt growing between them for months. A wall she had not understood until now. Eleanor had begged Daniel not to build it, and yet somehow, without meaning to, he had built it anyway. Brick by silent brick. Year after year. Protecting himself from a grief so large he did not know how to share it with the woman who now loved him. Claire made her decision as she heard the sound of Daniel's car pulling into the driveway outside. She was not going to pretend anymore. Tonight, she would tell him what she had found. Tonight, after 11 years of marriage, she would finally ask her husband to let her all the way in. She wiped her tears quickly and stood up from the desk just as she heard his key turning in the front door. Her heart pounded as she walked out of the study to meet him, carrying with her the weight of everything she now knew, and the fear of what might happen once he knew that she knew. Daniel set his keys down on the counter, the same way he did every evening, and turned to find Claire standing in the kitchen doorway, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. He froze the moment he saw her expression. "Claire, what's wrong?" She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. How do you tell your husband that you have read his most private grief, the kind of grief he had never trusted you enough to share? She had rehearsed this moment in her mind while waiting for him to come home, but now that he stood in front of her, every carefully chosen sentence disappeared. "I found the drawer," she finally said, "the locked one. I found the key, and I opened it." Daniel's face went through several emotions in the span of a few seconds. Confusion first, then a dawning realization, then something that looked almost like relief mixed with fear, an expression Claire had never seen on him before. He did not get angry, which surprised her. He simply stood very still, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. "You read the letters," he said quietly. It was not a question. "Yes." He sat down slowly at the kitchen table, running both hands through his hair, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. Claire sat down across from him, waiting, giving him the space he clearly needed, though her heart was pounding so hard she thought he might hear it. "Her name was Eleanor," Daniel finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I met her when I was 19. We were together for almost 4 years." Claire nodded gently, encouraging him to continue without pushing too hard. "We were going to get married," he continued. "We had already picked out a small piece of land near a lake, not far from where I grew up. We used to talk about the house we would build there, the kind of life we would have. I was so certain, Claire. I had never been more certain of anything in my life." "What happened to her?" Claire asked softly, though she already suspected the answer from the letters. Daniel's jaw tightened. "She got sick. It started with headaches. Then it got worse very quickly. By the time the doctors found it, there wasn't much they could do. She fought it for almost a year. I was with her through all of it. Every appointment, every treatment, every terrible night in the hospital. And then, one morning in April, she was gone." The kitchen was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Claire reached across the table and took his hand, and to her surprise, he let her, gripping it tightly, like a man holding on to something solid in the middle of a flood. "I was 23, Daniel continued. "I thought my whole life had ended with her. For a long time, I didn't know how to keep going. I moved away from that town. I stopped talking to most of the friends we had shared, because being around them just reminded me of everything I had lost. I built a different life, a quiet one, and I told myself I would never let anyone get close enough to hurt me like that again. But then you met me," Claire said quietly. "Then I met you." A faint, sad smile crossed his face. "And everything I had promised myself started to fall apart, because I fell in love with you, Claire, completely and honestly. But loving you also terrified me. Every time I felt myself getting closer to you, some part of me panicked, because loving someone that much meant I could lose them that much too. I couldn't survive that kind of loss twice." Claire felt tears sliding down her face again, but this time they were different tears, not the shock and confusion of finding the letters, but something closer to understanding, even compassion. "Is that why you never told me about her? You were protecting yourself?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "At first, maybe, but it became more complicated than that over time. The longer I didn't tell you, the harder it became to find the right moment. How do you bring up something like that after months of dating, after getting engaged, after getting married?" Every year that passed made the silence feel bigger, more impossible to break. "I told myself I was protecting you from a grief that had nothing to do with our life together. But really, I think I was protecting myself from having to relive it out loud." "Every anniversary you flinched at, every date you went quiet on," Claire said, pieces falling into place. "Those were dates connected to her." "April is when she passed," Daniel confirmed. "And our wedding anniversary in October, it's close to the date we first met, all those years ago. I never meant for the two things to feel connected in my mind, but somehow they always have been, every single year. I've spent our entire marriage quietly grieving her in silence every October, right in the middle of celebrating my life with you. I know how wrong that sounds." Claire absorbed this slowly, feeling a complicated mixture of sympathy and hurt rising inside her at the same time. "Daniel, I'm not upset that you loved someone before me. I'm not even upset that her loss still affects you. Grief doesn't just disappear because time passes, or because you find someone new. But I am hurt that you never let me share this with you. 11 years, Daniel. We built an entire life together, and this entire part of you, this entire piece of your heart, was locked away from me the whole time. I know, Daniel said, his voice breaking slightly. I know, and I'm sorry. I told myself it was easier this way, for both of us. But watching you find those letters tonight, watching the pain on your face, I realize now how selfish that reasoning actually was. I wasn't protecting you, Claire. I was protecting myself from having to be vulnerable, from having to let you see the parts of me that still feel broken. Claire wiped her eyes and looked directly at him. There's something else I need to ask you. The bracelet in the drawer, the silver one, was that hers? Daniel nodded. Her mother gave it to me after the funeral. She said Eleanor would have wanted me to have something of hers to remember her by. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it, but I also couldn't bear to look at it very often, so I kept it locked away with the letters and the photographs. And the late nights, Claire said, connecting another piece. The crying in the study. Is that where you go, to be alone with her memory? Sometimes, Daniel admitted. This time of year is harder for me than most. It's close to when we would have gotten married, if things had gone differently. I know it doesn't make sense. Grieving a wedding that never happened. A life that never existed outside of plans and promises. But some part of me still does, every single year, quietly, in that room, where I thought no one would ever know. Claire sat with this information for a long moment, trying to reconcile the man in front of her, vulnerable and honest for the first time in years, with the composed, steady husband she had known for over a decade. In some strange way, this Daniel felt more real to her than any version of him she had known before, even though the honesty came wrapped in years of hidden pain. I need you to understand something, Claire said carefully. I'm not asking you to stop grieving her. I would never ask that of you, and honestly, I don't think it would even be possible. Not fully. Not for someone you loved that deeply. But I need you to let me in, Daniel. Not just tonight, but going forward. I don't want to be married to a man who disappears into a locked room once a year to carry his pain alone. I want to be the person you turn to, even with the hardest parts of yourself. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, his eyes glistening. I don't know how to do that. I've spent so long protecting this part of myself that I'm not even sure I remember how to share it. Then we learn together, Claire said gently. But it starts with tonight. It starts with you actually telling me things, instead of me finding them locked in a drawer. Daniel nodded slowly, a mixture of relief and fear still visible on his face. There's more I haven't told you, he said quietly. About what happened after Eleanor died. About a promise I made, one I've kept for a very long time, one that still affects parts of our life together, even now. Claire's stomach tightened at these words. She had thought, for a brief moment, that the drawer had revealed the entire truth, that the letters and the photographs were the whole of what Daniel had been hiding. But the way he said, "There's more," the way his eyes dropped to the table instead of meeting hers, told her that the story was far from finished. What kind of promise? She asked carefully. Daniel took a deep breath, and Claire could see him gathering courage, the same way he must have gathered it 15 years ago to say goodbye to Eleanor in a hospital room. The same way he had gathered it moments ago to finally speak her name out loud after years of silence. Eleanor had a younger sister, he said. Alice. She was only 12 when Eleanor passed away, and their family situation was complicated. Their mother struggled financially after losing her eldest daughter, and there was no father in the picture. On the day of the funeral, I made a quiet promise to Eleanor's mother that I would help take care of Alice, in whatever way I could, for as long as she needed it. Claire's eyes widened slightly. Help how? Financially, mostly, Daniel said. School fees, medical bills when they came up, things like that. I never told anyone, not even my own family. It felt like something private, something I owed to Eleanor's memory. Alice is 27 now, and mostly independent. But I still send money when she needs it, and I still check in with her mother from time to time. Claire sat back in her chair, processing this new layer of information. It was not the betrayal she had feared in the darkest corners of her imagination over the past few days. Not another woman in the romantic sense, not an affair, It was something else entirely, a quiet, private act of loyalty to a promise made in grief, carried silently for 15 years. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" she asked, though her voice was gentler now, less accusing than before. "Because explaining it meant explaining Eleanor," Daniel said. "And explaining Eleanor meant opening a door I had kept closed for so long that I wasn't sure I could open it without everything falling apart. I know now how wrong that was. I know I should have trusted you with all of it, from the very beginning." Claire reached across the table again, and took both of his hands this time. "Thank you for telling me now," she said. "All of it. I know it wasn't easy." "There's one more thing," Daniel said, his voice trembling slightly. "Something I need to show you. Something I've never shown anyone." Claire looked at him, waiting, her heart still heavy with everything she had already learned tonight, but steady now, in a way it had not been before. Whatever else Daniel had been carrying, she was ready to hear it, ready to finally understand the full shape of the silence that had lived quietly inside their marriage for 11 long years. Daniel stood up from the table and walked to the study, and Claire followed him, watching as he opened the drawer once more with the same small brass key. This time, he did not hesitate or flinch away from her presence. He reached beneath the letters and the photographs and pulled out something Claire had missed during her earlier search, a thin, worn journal tucked flat against the bottom of the drawer. "I started writing in this the year after Eleanor died," he said, holding it carefully in both hands. "I never meant for it to be a secret from you specifically. I just never found a way to bring it into the light. Writing was the only way I knew how to process everything I was feeling, especially in those first few years, when I didn't have anyone to talk to about it." He handed the journal to Claire, and she opened it slowly, careful with the fragile, yellowed pages. The handwriting inside was Daniel's, but younger, messier, filled with the raw edges of grief that had not yet learned how to organize itself into calm sentences. She read a few lines from an early entry. "I don't know how to keep living in a world where she doesn't exist anymore. Everyone tells me it gets easier with time, but I don't believe them. I think I just get better at hiding how hard it still is." Claire looked up at Daniel, her chest tight with emotion. "You were so young," she said softly. 23, carrying all of this completely alone. "I had my parents," Daniel said, "but even they didn't fully understand. My mother kept telling me I would find someone else eventually. That time healed everything, and I know she meant well. But it felt like she was asking me to rush past something that deserved more respect than that. So I stopped talking about it with anyone. I just wrote it down instead, late at night, when the house was quiet." Claire flipped through a few more pages, watching the entries change over time, the grief slowly softening at the edges, though never fully disappearing. Then she found an entry dated a few months after she and Daniel had started dating, years after Eleanor's death. "I met someone tonight. Her name is Claire. There was something about the way she laughed that made me forget, just for a few hours, about the weight I usually carry. I don't know if I'm allowed to feel this again. It scares me more than anything ever has." Claire's eyes filled with tears again, but different tears than before, softer ones. She looked up at Daniel. "You wrote about me." "I wrote about you a lot," he admitted, a small, embarrassed smile crossing his face for the first time that evening. "Every important moment of our relationship is somewhere in these pages. Our first date. The night I knew I wanted to marry you. The morning of our wedding, when I almost couldn't believe I was allowed to be that happy again." Claire turned to a page near the middle of the journal and read another entry, this one dated the night before their wedding. "Tomorrow I marry Claire. I keep thinking about what Eleanor wrote to me in her last letter, about wanting me to live a whole life, to let someone love me the way she did. I hope, wherever she is, she knows I finally listened. I hope she isn't disappointed in me for finding happiness again. I think, somehow, she would be glad. I just wish I knew how to build this new happiness without feeling guilty about the life we never got to have." Claire closed the journal gently and set it down on the desk, then reached out and pulled Daniel into a tight embrace. He held on to her the way he had at the kitchen table, tightly, like something solid in the middle of a long overdue storm. "I wish you had let me carry some of this with you," Claire whispered against his shoulder. "Not to replace her memory, but to share the weight of it. That's what marriage is supposed to be, Daniel. Not two people pretending to be whole all the time, but two people helping each other carry the broken parts too. I know that now, Daniel said quietly. I think some part of me always knew it, but I was too afraid to test it. I was afraid that if I let you see how broken I still was underneath everything, you would realize you had married someone who couldn't fully give you all of himself. You gave me plenty, Claire said, pulling back to look at him. 11 years of kindness, patience, and love. I'm not saying you owed me every detail of your past the day we met, but somewhere along the way, as we built a whole life together, I think you owed me the truth of who you really are. All of it. Not just the parts that felt safe to share. Daniel nodded slowly, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. There's something else, he said. Something I think you should know, and something I think, maybe, you should be part of, going forward, if you're willing. What is it? Every year, on the anniversary of her passing, I visit her grave, Daniel said. It's about 2 hours from here, in the town where I grew up. I've always gone alone, usually early in the morning before you wake up. And I've told you I was going on a work trip, or visiting an old friend. I'm sorry for lying about that specifically. It felt like the one thing that was entirely mine, separate from our life together, and I didn't know how to share it without feeling like I was bringing you into a part of my past that had nothing to do with you. Claire absorbed this information quietly. In some ways, it stung more than the letters or the journal. The idea that Daniel had constructed small, careful lies over the years, specific alibis to protect this private ritual of grief. But she also understood, more clearly now than she had an hour ago, how deeply he had needed a space that felt untouched by the complicated feelings of guilt and fear that came with loving two people across different parts of his life. When is the next anniversary? Claire asked. Next month, Daniel said. April 14th. I want to come with you, Claire said, surprising herself slightly with how certain she felt saying it. Not to replace what that day means to you, but because I think it's time I understood the whole shape of the man I married. I want to see where she's buried. I want to understand where a part of your heart still lives. Daniel looked at her with an expression that combined disbelief and gratitude in equal measure. You would do that? I want to do that, Claire said. If you'll let me. Daniel nodded, his eyes wet again, but this time with something closer to relief than pain. There's one more thing, he said. Alice, Eleanor's younger sister. She still lives near the town, close to the cemetery. If we go, we might see her. I've kept in touch with her all these years, quietly, from a distance, but she knows about you. She's always asked how you're doing, actually. She's the one who first told me, years ago, that I shouldn't feel guilty about being happy with you. She said Eleanor would have wanted exactly that. Claire smiled softly through her tears. I would like to meet her. Over the following weeks, something in the house began to shift. Daniel started leaving the study door open more often, no longer disappearing behind it to grieve alone. Some evenings, he would sit with Claire on the porch and tell her small stories about Eleanor, not out of obligation, but because the memories no longer felt like forbidden territory. Claire listened carefully each time, learning the shape of a woman she had never met, but who had, in her own quiet way, shaped the man Claire had spent 11 years loving. There were still hard moments. Claire sometimes caught herself feeling a strange, complicated jealousy toward a woman who had been gone for 15 years, a feeling she knew was irrational, but could not always control. And Daniel, in turn, still occasionally retreated into old habits of silence, catching himself mid-sentence and needing gentle encouragement to continue. But the silence between them, the wall that had grown for months without either of them fully understanding why, began to thin, piece by piece, conversation by conversation. One evening, about 2 weeks before the anniversary, Claire found Daniel sitting on the porch steps, looking out at the darkening sky, the wooden box with the brass key resting beside him. I used to think keeping this locked away was a way of protecting the good memories, he said, as Claire sat down beside him. But I think, really, it was a way of keeping myself locked away too. From you. From everyone. I'm ready to stop doing that. Claire leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the last light fade from the sky. Then let's go to April 14th together, she said. Let's finally open every door, all the way. Daniel wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Together, he agreed quietly. I think that's exactly what she would have wanted, for both of us. As the days moved closer to the anniversary, Claire found herself thinking not just about Eleanor, or or about the years of silence Daniel had carried, but about her own marriage, and what it truly meant to know someone completely. She had spent 11 years believing she understood her husband fully, only to discover an entire hidden chapter of his life, locked away in a drawer. Now, walking toward that anniversary together, she understood that real intimacy was not something achieved once and kept forever. It was something built again and again, especially in the moments when silence threatened to take its place. The morning of April 14th arrived gray and quiet, with a light mist covering the roads as Claire and Daniel drove toward his hometown. Neither of them spoke much during the 2-hour drive, but the silence between them now felt different from the silence that had haunted their marriage for months. This silence was calm, companionable, filled with an understanding that had not existed before. Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel as they passed the sign welcoming them to Millbrook, the small town where he had grown up, where he had met Eleanor, where an entire chapter of his life had unfolded and ended long before Claire ever knew him. Claire reached over and placed her hand gently on his arm, and he glanced at her with a small, grateful smile. "It's strange," he said. "I haven't driven into this town with anyone beside me in 15 years. How does it feel?" Claire asked. "Less lonely than usual," he admitted. They drove past a small lake on the outskirts of town, and Daniel slowed the car slightly. "That's the lake," he said quietly, "where we used to talk about building a house someday." Claire looked out at the calm water, imagining a younger version of Daniel standing there, with a woman she had only ever seen in old photographs, both of them full of plans for a future that would never come to be. She felt no anger looking at the lake, only a quiet sadness for the years of pain her husband had carried, and a deep respect for how far he had come in choosing to share this place with her now. They arrived at the cemetery a short while later, a small, well-kept graveyard on a gentle hill at the edge of town. Daniel parked the car and sat still for a moment before opening the door, gathering himself the way Claire had seen him do at the kitchen table weeks earlier. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I will be," he said. "It's always hard in the beginning, but it gets easier once I'm actually here." They walked together across the damp grass until they reached a modest headstone near an old oak tree. Claire read the name carved into the stone: Eleanor Whitmore, beloved daughter and sister, gone too soon, but never forgotten. Beneath the name were dates that confirmed what Claire already knew: a life that had ended far too early, cut short at only 22 years old. Daniel knelt down and placed a small bundle of white flowers at the base of the headstone, the same kind, Claire noticed, that appeared in one of the old photographs from the drawer. He stayed kneeling for a long moment, his head bowed, his lips moving slightly in words Claire could not hear and did not try to. She stood a respectful distance away, giving him this moment, until he looked up and gestured for her to come closer. Claire knelt down beside him, and together they sat in silence in front of the grave, the morning mist slowly beginning to clear around them. "Eleanor," Daniel said quietly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "This is Claire, my wife. I think it's long past time the two of you finally met, even if only in this way." Claire felt tears building in her eyes, but she did not look away. "I'm sorry I never got the chance to know you," she said softly, speaking directly to the headstone. "But I know you loved him deeply, and I know he still carries that love with him every single day. I promise I'll take good care of him, the way you asked him to let someone do." Daniel reached over and took Claire's hand, holding it tightly as they knelt together in front of the grave. For the first time in 15 years, he was not visiting this place alone, and Claire could feel, in the quiet strength of his grip, just how much that meant to him. They stayed at the cemetery for almost an hour, Daniel sharing small memories as they came to him. Stories about Eleanor's laugh, about the way she used to hum songs while cooking, about a road trip they had taken one summer that had turned into an unexpected adventure when their car broke down halfway through. Claire listened to every story with genuine interest, understanding now that these memories were not threats to her own marriage, but simply proof of a full and complicated life her husband had lived before she ever entered it. As they were preparing to leave, a woman's voice called out from across the cemetery. "Daniel?" They both turned to see a woman in her late 20s approaching. Dark curly hair, very similar to the young woman in the old photographs, though her face held its own distinct features. Daniel stood up immediately, a warm smile breaking across his face. "Alice," he said, walking toward her and pulling her into a brief, affectionate hug. "I didn't expect to see you here today." "I come every year around this time too," Alice said, her eyes moving curiously toward Claire. "I didn't expect to see anyone else here either." Daniel turned back toward Claire, gesturing her forward. "Alice, this is my wife, Claire. Claire, this is Alice, Eleanor's younger sister." Alice's expression softened with genuine warmth as she reached out to shake Claire's hand. "It's really nice to finally meet you in person," she said. "Daniel has told me about you over the years, but I never thought we would actually meet like this." "I've only just learned about you myself," Claire admitted honestly. "Daniel told me everything a few weeks ago, about Eleanor, about the promise he made to your mother, about all the ways he's helped you over the years." Alice glanced at Daniel with an expression of surprise and gratitude. "You finally told her?" "It was time," Daniel said simply. "Past time, honestly." The three of them stood together near the grave for a while longer, and Alice shared her own memories of her older sister, filling in details from a younger sibling's perspective that added new dimensions to the picture Claire had been building in her mind. She learned that Eleanor had wanted to become a teacher, that she used to make up elaborate bedtime stories for Alice when they were children, that she had a habit of leaving small encouraging notes for people she loved, tucked into unexpected places. "She left me one of those notes about a month before she died," Alice said quietly. "I still have it. It says, 'Take care of the people I love, especially Daniel. He's going to need reminding that it's okay to be happy again.'" Claire felt fresh tears sliding down her face at these words, understanding now, more fully than ever, the quiet chain of love and responsibility that connected all of them together, even across the boundary of loss. Eleanor's final wishes had been carried out, not through any dramatic gesture, but through years of small, quiet acts of loyalty from the people who had loved her. Before they left the cemetery, Alice invited them both to stop by her house for coffee, an invitation Daniel accepted without hesitation, glancing at Claire to make sure she was comfortable with the idea. Claire nodded, genuinely wanting to spend more time getting to know this woman who had been a quiet, unspoken part of her husband's life for so many years. Alice's house was small but warm, filled with photographs of her own growing family, a husband and two young children who were currently at school. As she made coffee in the kitchen, she spoke openly about how much Daniel's support had meant to her over the years, especially during her college years when money had been tight and her mother had struggled to make ends meet on her own. "He never made me feel like a burden," Alice said. "Even when I know it must have been difficult for him, financially and emotionally, to keep helping our family the way he did. He always said it was what Eleanor would have wanted, and I think he was right, but I also think he did it because he genuinely cared about us, not just out of obligation to a promise." Claire looked over at Daniel, sitting quietly at the kitchen table, listening to Alice's words with a slightly embarrassed expression, clearly uncomfortable with too much praise. She thought about the man she had married 11 years ago, believing she understood his character fully, only to discover now the true depth of his quiet loyalty and love, extended not just to her, but to the memory of someone he had lost, and the family that memory had left behind. As they drove home later that afternoon, the mist long since cleared, and the sky bright with early spring sunshine, Claire reached over and took Daniel's hand. "Thank you for bringing me today," she said, "for all of it. The letters, the journal, the cemetery, meeting Alice. I know none of this was easy for you." "Thank you for wanting to be part of it," Daniel replied, glancing at her briefly, before returning his eyes to the road. "I spent so many years thinking I had to carry all of this alone, that sharing it would somehow diminish it, or worse, that it would push you away. Instead, I think it's brought us closer than we've been in a long time." Claire smiled softly, watching the familiar landscape roll past outside the window, as they drove back toward the life they had built together. A life she now understood more completely than she ever had before. The silence that had once felt like distance between them had transformed, slowly and carefully, into something closer to peace, a shared understanding, built not on the absence of difficult truths, but on the courage to finally speak them out loud. There was still work ahead of them, she knew. Old habits of silence did not disappear overnight, and there would likely be more moments in the future where Daniel retreated briefly into old patterns, and moments where Claire would need to gently remind him that he no longer had to carry things alone. But for the first time in months, Claire felt genuinely hopeful about the road ahead, confident that whatever challenges came their way, they would face them together, with honesty finally leading the way, instead of silence. Summer arrived gently that year, bringing with it a kind of lightness Claire had not felt in her marriage for a long time. The distance that once sat quietly between her and Daniel had continued to close in the months following their trip to Millbrook, replaced by a closeness built on honesty rather than careful silence. It was not a perfect transformation, and Claire had not expected it to be. But it was real, and it was steady, growing a little more solid with each passing week. Daniel no longer disappeared into his study to grieve alone. Some evenings, he would bring the old journal out to the porch and read passages aloud to Claire, sharing memories of Eleanor, not as secrets kept from his wife, but as part of the full story of who he was. Claire listened each time with genuine warmth, understanding now that these stories did not threaten what she and Daniel had built together. If anything, they deepened her understanding of the man she loved, revealing the layers of loyalty and depth of feeling that had always existed beneath his calm, steady exterior. Claire and Alice had also grown close in the months since their first meeting at the cemetery. They exchanged messages regularly, and Alice had visited twice, once bringing her 2 children along for a weekend that filled the house with laughter and the sound of small feet running across the wooden floors. Watching Daniel with Alice's children, patient and warm, reminded Claire of the gentle, caring man she had fallen in love with all those years ago, a man whose depth of love clearly extended far beyond the boundaries of his own household. One evening in late June, Claire and Daniel sat together on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set behind the trees at the edge of their yard. Daniel had been quieter than usual that day, and Claire had learned, over the past few months, to recognize the difference between his old, guarded silences and the simple, comfortable quiet of a man gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking," he said eventually, "about something I want to do, if you're comfortable with it." "What is it?" "I want to set up a small scholarship fund," he said, "in Eleanor's name. Something for young people from Millbrook who want to become teachers, since that was always her dream. I've been quietly helping Alice's family for years, but I think it's time to do something more lasting, something that honors her memory in a way that reaches beyond just our small circle." Claire felt a warm rush of pride and affection as she listened to him speak. "I think that's a beautiful idea," she said. "I'd love to help you set it up, if you'll let me be part of it." "I'd like that very much," Daniel said, reaching over to take her hand. "I don't think I could have imagined doing something like this even a year ago." "It's strange, how much has changed since you found that drawer." Claire smiled softly, thinking back to that terrifying night when she had first heard him crying, when she had first begun to suspect something was deeply wrong beneath the surface of their marriage. "I think about that night a lot," she admitted. "I was so scared of what I might find. I imagined every terrible possibility, an affair, a hidden family, something that would destroy everything we had built together. I never imagined I would find grief instead, a whole hidden world of love and loss you had been carrying by yourself for so many years." "I'm sorry it took finding that drawer for me to finally open up," Daniel said. "I should have trusted you with all of this a long time ago. I think, somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that being strong meant handling my pain alone, that sharing it would somehow make me weaker, or make you see me differently." "You were never weak for grieving her," Claire said gently, "and you're not weak now for finally sharing that grief with me. If anything, I think it takes a different kind of strength to finally open a door you've kept closed for so long, especially when you're not sure what will happen once you do." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky, the same way they had done in the weeks before their trip to Millbrook. But this silence, like so many of their silences now, felt full rather than empty, comfortable rather than heavy, with things left unsaid. In the following weeks, Claire and Daniel worked together to establish the scholarship fund, reaching out to Eleanor's old high school, gathering information about the application process, and setting aside a portion of their savings each month to build the fund steadily over time. Alice helped as well, offering suggestions and memories that helped shape the criteria for the scholarship, ensuring it would honor not just Eleanor's dream of becoming a teacher, but her broader spirit of encouragement and care for others. By late summer, The first scholarship announcement had gone out to local schools in Millbrook, inviting graduating students interested in pursuing careers in education to apply for a modest but meaningful award, named simply the Eleanor Whitmore Memorial Scholarship. Claire helped Daniel write the description that would appear on the application materials, drawing from the stories Alice had shared about her sister's warmth and encouragement toward everyone she met. On the day the first application deadline arrived, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the submissions with a focus and attentiveness Claire had not seen in him in months. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright with something that looked almost like joy, an emotion that had been rare in their household during the difficult months before Claire found the locked drawer. "There's a young woman here who wants to teach elementary school," he said, sliding one of the applications across the table toward Claire. "She writes about wanting to help children who struggle the way she once did, growing up without much support at home. It reminds me so much of the kind of teacher Eleanor always wanted to be." Claire read through the application carefully, feeling a quiet sense of rightness settle over her as she did. This was what real healing looked like, she realized, not the erasure of grief or loss, but the transformation of it into something that continued to give life and hope to others, long after the original loss had occurred. That October, on their 12th wedding anniversary, Claire and Daniel returned to the same restaurant where he had proposed all those years ago. This time, there was no distance between them, no unspoken weight hanging over the evening. Daniel raised his glass toward her partway through dinner, his eyes warm and steady, in a way that reminded Claire of the very beginning of their relationship, before grief had built its quiet walls between them. 12 years, he said. "I know this year hasn't been easy for either of us, but I think it's been the most honest year of our marriage, and honestly, the closest I've ever felt to you." "To honesty," Claire said, raising her own glass to meet his. "And to finally understanding each other completely." Daniel smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "To Eleanor too," he added quietly, "for reminding me, even after all these years, that it's okay to be fully happy again." Claire nodded, understanding completely now the strange and beautiful way that love could carry itself forward, across loss, across silence, across years of careful protection, that ultimately gave way to something far stronger, the courage to be fully known by the person you love, broken parts included. As they left the restaurant that evening, walking hand in hand toward their car under a clear autumn sky, Claire thought about the locked drawer that had once represented so much fear and uncertainty in her mind. It no longer held any mystery for her now, no secrets waiting to shatter her understanding of the man she had married. It simply held the full, complicated, beautiful story of a man capable of loving deeply, grieving honestly, and ultimately, choosing courage over silence. Once he finally understood that real love did not require him to carry his pain alone. Their marriage, Claire realized, had not been broken by what she found in that drawer. It had been saved by it, transformed from something quietly wearing thin at the edges into something far more solid, built on the kind of honesty that could withstand even the deepest, most carefully guarded truths. And as they drove home together that night, the road stretching quietly ahead of them, under a sky full of stars, Claire felt certain that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them the same way they had finally learned to face the past, together, honestly, and without fear of what the truth might reveal. 2 years passed, and the scholarship fund Claire and Daniel had built in Eleanor's name had grown steadily, supporting 3 more young students who dreamed of becoming teachers. Every spring, Daniel and Claire attended a small ceremony at the Millbrook School to award the scholarship in person, a tradition that had become one of the most meaningful days on their calendar. Alice usually joined them, often bringing her children, who had grown fond of calling Claire and Daniel their honorary aunt and uncle. It was during one of these visits that Claire noticed something new in Daniel, a kind of settled peace that had not fully been present even in the months right after he first opened up to her. He spoke about Eleanor more easily now, weaving her memory naturally into conversations, without the old flinch of guilt that used to cross his face whenever her name came up. Grief had not disappeared from his life, Claire understood, but it had found its proper place within him, no longer a locked room, but simply another part of the house they lived in together. One afternoon, while helping Daniel sort through old boxes in the study for a long overdue cleaning project, Claire came across the small wooden box that had once held the brass key. She lifted it carefully and looked at Daniel, who smiled at the sight of it. "You can open it," he said. "There's nothing locked away in here anymore that you don't already know." Claire opened the box and found the same items she remembered from years before: the coins, the faded movie ticket, and the key itself. Though the drawer it once opened had long since been left unlocked, its contents occasionally revisited together rather than hidden away in secret. "I think it's time we did something different with these," Claire said thoughtfully, holding up the old photographs and letters. "Not hide them away, but maybe put a few of them in a proper frame. Somewhere they can be seen, remembered, honored, instead of kept in the dark." Daniel considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'd like that. Maybe here in the study, somewhere quiet, but not hidden." Together, they chose one of the photographs, the one of Daniel and Eleanor laughing together on the beach, full of youthful joy, and had it framed simply and placed on a shelf in the study, alongside their own wedding photographs and pictures of family gathered over the years. It was not a shrine, nor a wound kept open. It was simply a part of their shared history, acknowledged openly rather than buried in silence. That evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sky change colors above the trees, Claire thought about how far they had come since that frightening night years earlier, when she had first heard her husband crying alone in the dark. She had feared, back then, that whatever secret he was hiding would break something between them beyond repair. Instead, that secret, once finally spoken into the open air, had become the very thing that deepened and strengthened everything they shared. Daniel reached over and took her hand, the same gesture he had made countless times over the years, but one that still carried its own quiet significance every time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for opening that drawer all those years ago. I don't think I would have found my way out of that silence on my own." Claire smiled and rested her head against his shoulder, watching the last light of evening settle gently over their home. "Thank you for finally letting me in," she said. "All the way in." They sat together like that for a long while, no words needed between them, the comfortable silence of two people who had learned, through hardship and honesty, exactly how to hold each other's whole hearts, broken pieces and all. The wall that grief had built between them, brick by silent brick over so many years, had long since come down, replaced instead by something far more lasting, a marriage built not on the absence of pain, but on the courage to face it together, side by side, for as long as they both should live.